Galactic history had always painted humans as dangerous, unruly, and unpredictable. They had survived against odds that should have broken them. They had risen from a death world where almost every species would have perished within days. Yet the Galactic Confederacy, in its arrogance, believed that it had found the humans' breaking point. They did not aim to destroy Earth's military. They did not target its infrastructure or even its leaders. Instead, they struck at the unguarded, the defenseless, the young. An orphanage located in one of Earth's outer colonies became their target. No military presence, no strategic value, just a place where abandoned children found shelter and safety. The Confederacy calculated that the psychological impact would shatter human resistance. The mission was clear: strike swiftly, leave no survivors, and leave Earth questioning its ability to protect its own. It was, to them, a tactical masterpiece, a message carved in fire. The Confederacy's elite soldiers descended upon the orphanage. They executed the plan without hesitation. Orbital strikes softened the defenses, though there were none. Ground forces stormed the structure. Rooms were cleared methodically. The children were not warriors. They could not resist. Some tried to hide. Some tried to run. Some sent out desperate distress signals that would never reach their intended recipients in time. At least, that was what the Confederacy believed. Within minutes, the orphanage was reduced to rubble. The soldiers returned to their ships, confident they had delivered the intended blow. Galactic broadcasts carried the news swiftly. Some species celebrated the decisive strike, praising the Confederacy's resolve. Others, even those indifferent to humans, recoiled in disgust at the atrocity. The Confederacy dismissed these reactions as irrelevant. The goal was achieved. The humans would break. But the humans did not break. The news feeds from Earth went dark. No response. No threats. No mobilization of fleets. The silence unnerved even the most hardened Confederacy generals. They expected fury, but they were met with absence. The Confederacy's analysts scrambled to interpret the silence. Some suggested the humans were paralyzed with grief. Others suspected the humans were preparing a response so vast that it required time. But none anticipated the true nature of Earth's answer. In a closed session, Earth's unified leadership reviewed the event. Military commanders proposed immediate retaliation on a planetary scale. Tactical advisors recommended multi-front assaults to overwhelm Confederacy strongholds. But the Civilian Council rejected all proposals. Instead, they selected a single response. A name surfaced quietly, decisively. Adira. Records of her service were sealed. She had disappeared from public view years prior. Some whispered her name with reverence, others with fear. Earth would not send an army. They would send her. Adira had been more than a soldier. She had been the embodiment of human adaptability and precision. She was a tactician, an operative, and a force of nature all at once. Her connection to the orphanage was personal. She had once been one of those children, abandoned, left to the mercy of an unforgiving world. The same world that had forged her into something the galaxy was not prepared to face. The Council's decision was not made out of desperation. It was made out of calculated certainty. One was enough. When Adira received the transmission, there were no words of persuasion. There was no need. The data packet included mission coordinates, casualty reports, and the faces of the children who had perished. Among them were orphans she had personally sponsored, children she had once promised would never be harmed. Her silence was her answer. She began preparing immediately. Confederacy intelligence intercepted fragments of Earth internal communications, but failed to understand their significance. They expected fleets. They expected weapons. They did not understand why only a single vessel departed. They dismissed it as irrelevant. They continued their operations without concern. They had already won. In their eyes, humans were too scattered, too emotional, too reactive to mount a meaningful response to such a precise psychological attack. Adira's journey through space was marked not by haste, but by absolute clarity. She carried no grand arsenal. She did not seek public vengeance. She sought the Confederacy's understanding. She would carve it into their history. The galaxy's attention slowly turned toward her path, but most still did not grasp the depth of what approached. Confederacy border outposts barely registered her presence. They focused on larger fleet movements, entirely missing the storm gathering in the silence of her advance. The first incident occurred at an isolated patrol station. Adira made contact. Reports from the few survivors describe a human who moved with impossible efficiency. She did not engage in prolonged battles. She dismantled the squad in seconds, disabling systems with surgical precision. The survivors were left alive, intentionally. They carried the story back to their superiors. Adira did not speak to them. She did not need to. Her message had already begun to spread. The Confederacy initially dismissed these reports as exaggerated. A lone human could not possibly pose a threat to their vast military machine. Yet, in the days that followed, more reports surfaced. More outposts fell. More survivors were left behind, each recounting the same chilling details. A woman who moved like a weapon forged for a singular purpose. A woman who did not negotiate, who did not retreat, who did not falter. The Confederacy's command structure started to fracture under the weight of conflicting orders. Some demanded immediate escalation. Others insisted she was merely a symbol, a psychological ploy. Galactic news channels speculated wildly. Some commentators called her a ghost. Others believed she was a myth designed to destabilize the Confederacy. Meanwhile, Adira advanced, undeterred by the noise. She did not need to be believed. She only needed to be felt. Confederacy commanders, desperate to reclaim control of the narrative, deployed elite mercenary teams to intercept her. Each engagement ended in the same way. Mercenaries incapacitated. Survivors left to spread the story further. Adira's strategy was deliberate. She allowed information to escape. She let the Confederacy witness their own helplessness. Entire units surrendered upon sighting her, believing the legends. Some Confederacy soldiers abandoned their posts before she arrived, driven by a fear that eclipsed logic. The Confederacy's Central Command failed to contain the collapse. They miscalculated not only the tactical threat, but the psychological devastation inflicted by a single human's relentless advance. Through it all, Earth remained silent. They made no diplomatic overtures. They issued no demands. Their message had already been delivered through Adira's actions. In the quiet corridors of power, Confederacy officials began to question their initial assumptions. They had believed humans to be emotionally fragile. They had believed that by targeting the young, they would break the human spirit. Instead, they had unleashed something far more terrifying, a human who did not come with fleets or firestorms, but with precision that made entire armies irrelevant. Adira moved through Confederacy space with unwavering purpose, each step calculated, each target chosen for maximum impact. The Confederacy still failed to understand the depth of the mistake they had made, sending wave after wave of soldiers, mercenaries, and automated defenses to intercept her. But they were not facing an army. They were facing a woman who embodied the quiet, terrifying resolve of humanity. Her progress was not measured by territory gain, but by the fear she left behind. Entire stations abandoned their posts at the mere whisper of her arrival. Squadrons fled without firing a shot. Reports from the field became fragmented, filled with contradictions, confusion, and dread. The Confederacy's high command scrambled to formulate a coherent response, but each strategy crumbled in execution. Adira moved faster than their projections, striking critical outposts, cutting through supply lines, and collapsing communication networks. She needed no reinforcements, no external support. She used the enemy's own resources, the very infrastructure designed to protect the Confederacy, to tear them apart from within. Local commanders began refusing orders, unwilling to face her. Panic spread. Some Confederacy units deserted entirely, while others surrendered to civilian human outposts in distant sectors, begging for mercy that had not yet been denied. The Confederacy's leadership convened in increasingly desperate sessions, blaming each other for the escalation. They had expected retaliation, but they could not comprehend precision, the patience, the scale of psychological warfare they now faced. Mercenary groups contracted to stop Adira returned crippled and broken. Survivors spoke of a woman who used everything around her as a weapon, who left survivors deliberately to spread fear, who never spoke but whose presence silenced entire battlefields. Adira's movements were methodical. She dismantled weapon caches, redirected automated defense grids, and collapsed starport hubs. She disabled rather than destroyed, not out of mercy, but because destruction was not the goal. Her message was carried forward by those she allowed to live. Commanders stripped of their fleets. Soldiers left with their weapons disabled. Bases left intact, but useless. Each survivor carried the same truth. The Confederacy was not facing conventional war. They were facing something far worse. Confederacy war analysts tried to anticipate her next move, but Adira never adhered to predictable patterns. She ignored strategic locations in favor of symbolic targets. She obliterated recruitment centers, depots where child soldiers were trained, locations where military propaganda had been broadcast celebrating the attack on the orphanage. Each strike was deliberate, each location tied to the initial atrocity. The Confederacy's ability to recruit new soldiers collapsed as terror spread through their colonies. Entire sectors began to fall into disarray as word of her approach preceded her. Civilian populations rioted, demanding that their leaders negotiate with Earth or surrender entirely. Confederacy governors struggled to maintain order, but Adira was always several steps ahead, moving through territories with impossible speed, striking where defenses were weakest, where fear would spread the fastest. Her silence was more devastating than the largest of human fleets. Desperate to stop her advance, the Confederacy deployed their most elite forces, specialized units trained to counter human tactics. They set traps, layered defenses, constructed kill zones designed to exploit human weaknesses. But Adira did not approach as expected. She bypassed their kill zones entirely, infiltrated through maintenance corridors, supply routes, and gravitational corridors overlooked by military planners. Each defensive position fell, without a shot being fired. She used the Confederacy's own arrogance against them. In her wake, she left systems paralyzed, defense grids locked in permanent standby, starships trapped by disabled navigational arrays, command centers broadcasting static. The Confederacy's chain of command fractured, each faction accusing the others of betrayal or incompetence. Some suggested evacuation, others argued for escalation, but none could present a strategy with any chance of success. The Confederacy's technological superiority was meaningless against an enemy who refused to engage on conventional terms. Humanity, watching from afar, maintained its silence. There were no fleets mobilizing, no armies crossing borders. Only Adira. Her legend grew among the Confederacy's lower ranks. Her name became synonymous with inevitability. Training simulators began including her as an unbeatable scenario. Some soldiers refused to even participate in the exercises, believing that preparation was futile. Commanders debated whether surrender was still possible, whether Earth would accept any terms after what had been done. Adira's understanding of the Confederacy's internal systems allowed her to disable entire sectors remotely, manipulating outdated protocols, leveraging maintenance subroutines, and using their own bureaucracy as a weapon. She did not destroy infrastructure. She rendered it unusable, leaving it intact as a monument to their helplessness. She disrupted supply chains without striking convoys, simply by disabling the distribution nodes that kept them moving. Planets that once fed the Confederacy's military machine found themselves isolated, their stockpiles inaccessible. Confederacy scientists proposed countermeasures, but each solution was outdated by the time it was deployed. Adira adapted faster than their systems could respond. She exploited the delays between decision and execution, the sluggishness inherent in Confederacy size. Where the Confederacy moved in weeks, she moved in hours. Every failed defense deepened the psychological wound. Every abandoned station became a warning to those who remained. As the Confederacy's political leadership fractured, dissent grew among its military ranks. Officers questioned whether their superiors understood what they faced. Some defected, seeking asylum with neutral species, or even with human outposts. They provided intelligence willingly, desperate to distance themselves from the Confederacy's original crime. Others abandoned their posts entirely, slipping into the shadows of the galaxy to escape what they now believed was inevitable. Adira's strikes were not random. She targeted systems tied directly to the decision to attack the orphanage, logistics officers who had approved the operation, propaganda stations that had broadcast its supposed success, training academies where soldiers were conditioned to dehumanize humans. Each carefully selected target further eroded the Confederacy's operational capabilities and internal cohesion. Confederacy communications grew increasingly desperate. They flooded human channels with surrender offers, demands for negotiations, pleas for mercy. Earth responded with silence. Adira continued her advance. Confederacy diplomats attempted to contact her directly, offering terms, safe passage, even restitution, but she refused to acknowledge them. Her silence was absolute, her focus unbroken. Humanity's message was becoming clear without words. This was not a war for territory, nor a negotiation for resources. This was a demonstration, a warning etched into the foundation of the Confederacy's identity. The attack on the orphanage had not broken humanity. The Confederacy's core systems, once thought untouchable, now existed in a state of suspended terror. Leaders who had once celebrated the attack on the human orphanage had long since abandoned their posts, some fleeing to remote sectors, others disappearing entirely. No one within the Confederacy's high command dared to believe they could stop Adira. She had become the embodiment of an inevitable consequence. Their forces, fractured and demoralized, offered no unified resistance. The ships that remained in orbit around key worlds maintained a fragile pretense of defense, but their crews had no will to engage. Orders issued from the Confederacy's command centers were delayed, questioned, ignored, or quietly erased. The war was no longer fought with weapons or tactics. It had become a battle of silence, of endurance against a growing certainty that their defeat was already complete. Adira's arrival in the core sectors signaled the final unraveling. She bypassed planetary defenses as easily as she had dismantled outposts and fleets. She moved through security layers with precision that made entire protocols obsolete. The Confederacy's most advanced security systems offered no deterrent. She slipped past them, appearing where no one expected her to be, disabling vital systems without destroying them, leaving the infrastructure intact but useless. Her presence rendered their most guarded locations vulnerable. Panic rippled through every level of command. The Confederacy's War Council, the architects of the orphanage assault, retreated to what they believed to be their most secure stronghold. They fortified the world with remaining fleets, deployed their most elite security forces, and locked themselves behind layers of defenses built to withstand planetary sieges. But they no longer trusted their security, their commanders, or even each other. They had seen too many fail to stop her. When Adira reached them, no declaration accompanied her approach. There were no demands, no negotiations, no acknowledgement of the surrender pleas sent from every Confederacy channel. Earth had not answered. She did. She bypassed the fleets, disabled security networks, and entered the War Council's inner chambers without resistance. Their defenses did not fail. They simply became irrelevant. The council members, stripped of their bravado, realized they had misunderstood the nature of humanity's response from the beginning. They had not been targeted by fleets because humanity had never intended to wage a traditional war. Humanity had sent a lesson. Adira moved with cold precision. She incapacitated guards, left command staff alive but neutralized, and made certain that each of the war council members understood why they were being spared. Her presence in that chamber, silent and unstoppable, etched the final message into Confederacy's collective memory. The council was not obliterated in vengeance. They were left to live, to carry the weight of what they had done and what had followed. They would be the ones to spread the story of what happens when humanity's young are harmed. In the following days, entire Confederacy fleets surrendered unconditionally. Entire sectors broadcast their allegiance to Earth without being asked. Civil unrest toppled regional governors. Worlds once loyal to Confederacy tore down their own banners. Confederacy soldiers refused to carry arms against humans. The collapse was not enforced by Earth's military. It was executed by the Confederacy itself, torn apart by the consequences of its own decision. The Confederacy's internal networks, now fully aware of the scale of Adira's campaign, circulated warnings not to engage, not to resist, not to provoke. The legend of the woman who came alone, who silenced fleets and crippled governments, spread beyond Confederacy space into neutral territories, and even among Earth's historical rivals. Adira did not issue a final statement. She vanished as quietly as she had appeared. Her mission complete, her message delivered, she left the ruins of Confederacy's leadership to sort through the pieces of their collapsed empire. No formal armistice was signed. No peace treaty was negotiated. The Confederacy's war against humanity simply ceased to exist, suffocated under the weight of its own terror. Earth's leaders never acknowledged a return, never spoke of the campaign. They simply resumed their silence. Across the galaxy, the lesson resonated. The perception of humanity shifted irreversibly. They were no longer seen as a volatile death world species prone to emotional overreaction. They were now understood as something else entirely, a species that could condense its wrath into a single individual and deploy it with surgical, merciless precision. The message was clear. Harm to humanity's young would not be met with overwhelming war. It would be met with something the galaxy had no defense against. The Confederacy had not been defeated by fleets or by superior firepower. It had been dismantled by one human, who never negotiated, never retaliated conventionally, and never allowed them to control the narrative. Adira's name passed into galactic legend, but the specifics of her campaign remained elusive. Survivors told fragmented stories, many too afraid to speak openly. Confederacy archives recorded her path, but could not explain the speed, the precision, or the utter inability of their forces to stop her. Entire academies would later study her campaign, failing to identify a tactical weakness or a strategic misstep. Some species chose to believe she was a unique anomaly, a singular threat that would never be replicated. Others quietly prepared for the possibility that there might be more like her. The Confederacy's former territories fractured into isolated states, each desperate to avoid the appearance of aggression toward humanity. Political treaties shifted rapidly. Species that had once allied with the Confederacy now sought friendship with Earth, not out of genuine alliance, but out of survival. Human diplomats, when they eventually reemerged, found the galaxy immeasurably more cooperative. Earth's interests were prioritized without argument. Galactic councils that had once dismissed human concerns now defer to them without resistance. Humanity's power was no longer measured in ships or colonies, but in the shadow Adira had cast across civilizations. Confederacy records, when later declassified, revealed the depth of their panic. Internal memos showed leaders debating surrender while still publicly claiming dominance. Logs captured their final transmissions, desperate offers of peace that went unanswered. Their histories recorded the orphanage attack as a strategic miscalculation, a misjudgment of human resolve, but that was a distortion. The true failure was not underestimating Earth's military power. It was underestimating their capacity for silent, enduring retaliation. Adira's story became more than a military campaign. It became a galactic warning. Among Confederacy remnants, it became law to avoid engaging with humans beyond regulated trade.